Welcome to Royal Insights, where we explore the stories, traditions, and fascinating details behind royal families and dynasties from around the world. Join us as we uncover the history, culture, and curiosities that connect crowns across continents.
Which royal families still rule Europe today? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. It's the year 1780. You're standing in the center of Europe, let's say Vienna, the heart of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. Everywhere you look, power has a face. It wears a crown. It sits on a throne. It issues commands that armies obey and laws that millions follow. The idea that a single person could inherit the right to rule an entire nation doesn't seem strange or old-fashioned. It seems like the natural order of things. It seems inevitable. Now, fast forward. Keep your eyes closed. Let 240 years of revolutions, wars, empires collapsing, democracies rising, 2 world wars, 1 Cold War, and the invention of the internet all rush past you in the dark. Open your eyes. You're in Europe today. And here's what nobody warned you about. There are still kings and queens. Not in museums, not in history books, not in costume dramas on television. Well, those too. But actual monarchs, living, breathing heads of state who sit on thrones and represent nations and appear on postage stamps and make headlines around the world. 12 of them, to be precise. 12 reigning monarchies in Europe today, surviving in a continent that experienced more political upheaval than almost anywhere else on Earth. And that raises the most interesting question in modern political history. How? How did they survive when so many others fell? What did they do differently? What did they understand that the others didn't? That's what this episode is about. Not just who the surviving royal families are, but the remarkable, counterintuitive story of why they're still here. To appreciate how extraordinary these survivors are, first you need to understand what the map of European monarchies looked like just over 100 years ago. Picture a continent almost entirely governed by kings, emperors, and czars. In the east, the Russian Empire, the largest country on Earth, was ruled by Nicholas II, a czar with near absolute power over roughly 160 million people. In Central Europe, the German Kaiser commanded one of the most powerful military and industrial machines in history. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a vast patchwork of languages and cultures held together by the Habsburg dynasty, stretched from the Alps to the plains of modern-day Ukraine. The Ottoman Sultan still presided over territories in southeastern Europe. And from Lisbon to Stockholm, royal families occupied palaces, commanded armies, and governed nations with varying degrees of democratic accountability, but governed them nonetheless. If you had surveyed this landscape in 1910 and asked a reasonable, well-educated person whether monarchies would still exist in Europe a century later, they would have almost certainly said yes. Probably most of them, perhaps all of them. Then came the freight train. The First World War, which, remember, started partly because of the assassination of an archduke in a royal dynasty dispute, destroyed empires with astonishing speed. By 1918, the German Kaiser had abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had simply ceased to exist. The Russian Tsar and his entire family had been executed by revolutionaries in a basement in Yekaterinburg, and the violence wasn't finished. The Second World War brought more thrones down. Communist regimes swept across Eastern Europe after 1945, and, one by one, the remaining monarchies were abolished, sometimes through referendums, sometimes through force, sometimes through the quiet threat of force that nobody needed to make explicit. Bulgaria, Romania, Yugoslavia, Albania, Hungary, gone. By the mid-20th century, monarchies in Europe looked like an endangered species. So why do 12 of them still exist? The answer, it turns out, has almost nothing to do with tradition and almost everything to do with adaptation. Here is the central paradox of every surviving European monarchy, and I want you to sit with it for a moment because it sounds almost absurd. The royal families that gave up power are the ones that kept their thrones. Think about that. The monarchies that survived are, almost without exception, the ones that voluntarily, or under pressure, or both, transform themselves from actual rulers into something more like living symbols. They surrendered political authority to elected parliaments and democratic governments. They stopped commanding armies. They stopped making laws. They accepted that their role was ceremonial, not executive. And in doing so, they made themselves almost impossible to abolish. Because here's the thing about abolishing a monarchy that holds no real power. It becomes much harder to justify the effort. What exactly are you fighting against? A family that appears at national celebrations, represents the country at international events, provides continuity and historical identity, and costs roughly the same as a mid-sized government department? The argument for revolution loses its urgency when there's nothing to revolt against. The monarchies that fell, almost without exception, were the ones that refused this bargain. Nicholas II of Russia clung to autocratic power in the face of a modernizing society until the pressure exploded into revolution. The German Kaiser's identification with military aggression made him a legitimate target for popular anger after defeat in the First World War. The Eastern European monarchies that survived into the 20th century were abolished not because they were too powerful, but because they were associated with the old order in societies where the old order had catastrophically failed. Adaptation wasn't just a smart strategy, it was the only strategy, and the monarchies of Northern Europe understood this earlier than almost anyone else. If you want to understand the most successful blueprint for monarchical survival in the modern world, look north. Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden are three of the world's most consistently democratic, egalitarian, and prosperous societies. They top global rankings in education, healthcare, quality of life, and social trust. They are, by almost any measure, thoroughly modern nations. And all three of them still have monarchs. Now, an American hearing this might expect some tension there, some awkward contradiction between progressive societies and hereditary rulers. But the tension largely doesn't exist, and understanding why reveals something profound about what a monarchy actually is in the 21st century. Take Sweden. The Swedish monarchy traces its current dynasty, the Bernadottes, to a Napoleonic general who was invited to become heir to the Swedish throne in 1810, which itself is a fascinating story, but let's not get distracted. Today, the Swedish monarch performs no political functions whatsoever. The king opens parliament, he represents Sweden abroad, he attends national ceremonies, he embodies a sense of historical continuity that stretches back centuries. And then he goes home. Political decisions? Parliament. Government? Elected officials. The king's opinion on legislation? Constitutionally irrelevant. What Swedes have is not a ruler. They have something more like a living national monument, one that breathes, gives speeches, and occasionally makes news. The surveys consistently show that a majority of Swedes are comfortable with this arrangement, not despite being modern and democratic, but in some sense because of it. The monarchy doesn't threaten democratic values because it has no political power to threaten them with. Denmark's monarchy is even older, over 1,000 years of continuous royal lineage, making it one of the most ancient institutions of any kind still functioning in the Western world. Imagine that, when the ancestors of most modern European states didn't exist yet. Danish kings were already making decisions in Scandinavia. That longevity has become its own form of legitimacy. It's not divine right. It's not military power. It's the quiet, accumulated weight of 1,000 years of unbroken presence. And Norway's monarchy has a different but equally instructive story. The Norwegian royal family during the Second World War chose not to surrender to the Nazi occupation. King Haakon VII refused to abdicate, fled to London, and led the Norwegian government in exile for 5 years. He returned after liberation as a hero. That memory transformed the Norwegian monarchy into something that felt genuinely connected to national dignity and resistance, not just inherited privilege. In each of these cases, the monarchy survived not by insisting on its importance, but by demonstrating a different kind of importance. Not power, not authority, but meaning. No discussion of surviving European monarchies is complete without the one everybody already knows. the one that somehow became not just a national institution, but a global phenomenon, the British royal family. Let me try to put this in perspective. When Princess Diana died in 1997, an estimated 2.5 billion people watched her funeral on television. When Prince William married Catherine Middleton in 2011, an estimated 3 billion watched. The British monarchy generates more global media attention than most of the world's governments, most of the world's celebrities, and probably most of the world's anything. How did a constitutional monarchy on a rainy island in the North Atlantic become this? Britain's empire meant that the British crown had a presence, psychological, cultural, economic, across much of the globe for centuries. That reach left imprints that didn't disappear when the empire did. Part of the answer is strategic. The British royal family understood, especially under Queen Elizabeth II's extraordinarily long reign, that visibility and discretion needed to be carefully balanced. The monarch should be present enough to feel relevant, but restrained enough never to provoke a genuine constitutional crisis. Elizabeth II managed this balance for 70 years. Whether her successors can maintain it is one of the more interesting, open questions in contemporary European politics. But here's the deeper thing, and this applies to all the surviving monarchies, not just Britain. In an era of relentless political noise, of elections every few years, governments that rise and fall, news cycles that eat themselves, there is something genuinely valuable about an institution that simply persists, that doesn't ask for your vote, that doesn't change its message depending on polling data, that is simply there, decade after decade, as a point of reference. The surviving monarchies figured out that continuity itself can be a service. In a world that changes faster than humans can process, the fact that some things remain, not forever, not immovably, but consistently, turns out to be something people value more than most political theorists expected. Let's go back to the question we started with. How did they survive? The short answer is this. The monarchies that are still standing today survived because they understood something that their fallen counterparts did not. Power is not the only source of legitimacy. And in a democratic age, power is actually the most fragile source of legitimacy there is. Because power can always be challenged. It can always be taken away. It can always be delegitimized if enough people decide they want it gone. But meaning, shared history, national identity, the quiet sense of continuity that comes from knowing that the same institution has been a part of your country's story for 300 or 500 or 1,000 years, that is much harder to abolish. It doesn't generate the same resentments. It doesn't create the same enemies. It asks much less from you, and it asks it much less aggressively. The surviving monarchies of Europe are a lesson in the politics of self-reinvention. They looked at a world that was changing around them, understood that clinging to old forms of power would destroy them, and chose, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes gracefully, sometimes under considerable pressure, to become something different. Not rulers, symbols. Not commanders, representatives. Not above the nation, part of it. And here, perhaps, is the most surprising thing about this entire story. In surrendering what made them powerful, these royal families found what made them durable. That's not just a lesson about monarchies. It might be the most important lesson in politics, full stop. 12 crowns still standing in the most politically turbulent continent in modern history. Not despite what they gave up, because of it.